This happened in early February, barely 6 weeks ago as I write this. Winter in Gothenburg, Sweden, arrives with a particular kind of misery. Not the clean, photogenic misery of heavy snowfall, but the gray, relentless misery of cold rain that falls sideways off the North Sea and soaks through whatever you're wearing within 30 seconds of stepping outside. We'd had it every single day for nearly 2 weeks straight by that point. The kind of weather that makes the whole city look like it's being slowly dissolved. I worked as an outdoor patrol guard for a large industrial storage facility on the eastern edge of the city, a sprawling complex of loading bays, warehouse units, and equipment sheds surrounded by a perimeter fence and not much else. It was the kind of place that looks exactly the same at 2 in the afternoon as it does at 2 in the morning. Utilitarian, featureless, lit by sodium floodlights that turned everything a flat amber color and cast hard shadows off every corner. My normal duties involved circuit patrols of the perimeter and the loading areas on a rotating schedule throughout the night. But the company had a standing protocol that in sustained heavy rain, outdoor guards were permitted to remain inside the main facility entrance and conduct monitoring from there. It was a concession to basic practicality. Nobody patrols effectively when they can barely see through the water in their eyes. So on that particular Thursday night, with the rain hammering down at a rate that was making the gutters overflow and running in sheets across the concrete apron outside, I was posted inside. I came on at 8:30, took the handover from the day, Supervisor Eric Sandstrom, who gave me a 30-second rundown of nothing significant and left with the look of a man very grateful not to be staying, and locked up the staff entrance behind him. The facility emptied quickly on evenings. The last warehouse crew signed out at 8, and the site went quiet almost immediately. By 9 o'clock, the only sound was rain. The main entrance of the building was a wide glass-fronted reception area with double doors facing the vehicle access road. Behind it, a long central corridor ran the full depth of the facility, with heavy fire doors at intervals and a series of side corridors branching off it at right angles, each leading to one of the main warehouse bays. My post was the entrance area, a chair, a monitor showing the 4 external camera feeds, a radio handset, and a direct line to the security company's central dispatch. I had a torch, a full raincoat I didn't need tonight, and a thermos of coffee I brought from home. The first 3 hours were exactly what I expected. Rain against the glass. The occasional flicker of lightning somewhere out over the water, followed seconds later by low, rolling thunder. I drank my coffee slowly, checked the camera feeds at regular intervals, made 2 trips down the corridor to the bathroom, and spent the remainder of the time doing what all-night guards eventually do, conducting a private war against drowsiness. I've been at this job for 4 months. I knew the particular quality of silence that a large, empty building produces at night, the way sounds travel differently through it, the way the structure itself seems to breathe and settle in ways it never does during the day. I was used to it, so when the sound came, I felt it before I consciously registered it. A deep, resonant impact, felt through the floor as much as heard through the air. It rolled through the entire building in a wave, the kind of sound that has mass to it, like something very large made of metal had either buckled under pressure or been forcefully displaced. A creaking undertone followed it, low and prolonged, the sound of stressed material finding a new position. Then silence resumed, as total and undisturbed as before. I stood at the entrance doors with my hand on the glass and listened. Outside, rain. Inside, nothing. I told myself what any reasonable person tells themselves in those moments. Old buildings make noise, large metal structures expand and contract with temperature changes. Wind creates pressure differentials that can shift unsecured panels and doors. All of that was true. All of it was also entirely plausible. And yet the sound had been significant enough, resonant enough, to eliminate any possibility that I'd imagined it or misidentified it as something minor. Whatever had made that noise, something had moved. I unclipped my torch from my belt, opened the inner door to the main corridor, and walked into the building. I want to be clear about something. In 4 months of working at that facility, almost all of my time on site had been spent outside. I knew the perimeter fence line, the positions of every external camera, the locations of the loading bay shutters, and the emergency exit points. The inside of the main building was different territory. I had walked the central corridor perhaps a handful of times, to use the bathroom, to check the electrical board once when a circuit had tripped, to escort a late-running maintenance contractor out at the end of a shift. I did not know the warehouse bays themselves. I had no mental map of what was inside them. The central corridor was lit by low emergency strip lighting that ran along the base of the walls. Enough to navigate by, not enough to see clearly. My torch beam cut ahead of me as I walked, picking out the reflective strip on each fire door, the numbers stenciled on the walls at each junction. I reached the first side corridor on the left and swept the torch down it. A closed fire door at the far end, padlocked. The second on the right, same. Third on the left, fourth on the right. All closed, all apparently undisturbed. At the far end of the main corridor, where it terminated in a solid wall with a final fire door set into it, I stopped. The door was not fully closed, not dramatically ajar, not swung open or broken from its housing, just fractionally, incrementally open, the edge of it sitting perhaps 3 centimeters off the frame, a thin vertical strip of deeper darkness where the seal should have been. I stood looking at it for a moment. I genuinely could not tell you whether it had been left that way by the last person through it or whether something had changed it more recently. I had no reference point. I had never been down here before. I crossed to it, took hold of the handle, and pushed it fully open. The warehouse bay beyond was enormous. The torch beam, which could comfortably illuminate the full width of any normal room, barely reached the far wall. Ceiling height, perhaps 12 meters. Floor space the size of a football pitch, filled with towering shelving racks running in parallel rows from front to back. The racks were loaded with palletized goods wrapped in industrial stretch film, and between each row was a corridor of shadow that the torch could only partially penetrate. The air inside was cooler than the corridor and smelled of machine oil and cardboard. I stood in the doorway and swept the beam left and right across the front section of the space. "Hello." My voice left me and traveled out into the bay and came back changed, flattened by the scale of the space, absorbed by the shelving, the word returning to me smaller and more uncertain than I'd intended it. I waited, listened. Nothing. I had already begun to step back, already begun to compose the sensible conclusion. The sound had been structural. The door had been left open by the evening crew. There was nothing here when I heard it. It was close, closer than made any sense given the size of the space. Somewhere within the first few rows of shelving, off to my right, no more than 10 or 15 meters away. A sound that occupied an uncomfortable space between two possibilities. It could have been a man murmuring quietly to himself, or it could have been a man softly, privately laughing. I could not determine which. I could not determine words, or tone, or anything beyond the fact that it was human, and it was there, and it was deliberate. Not accidental sound, not involuntary sound, but the sound of someone who was aware of me and choosing what to produce. Every part of me went cold. Is somebody in here? I kept my voice level with some effort. This is a restricted facility. You need to identify yourself. A pause. The rain on the roof, steady and indifferent. Then a voice, low and unhurried. Come here. 2 words, softly delivered, almost gently, from somewhere in the darkness among the racks. I didn't move. What? The voice again, fractionally louder, the same flat tone. Come here. No urgency. No explanation. No context of any kind. Just those 2 words repeated, offered from the dark like an invitation. I stood in the doorway for perhaps 2 full seconds after the second repetition. My torch beam was angled into the space, but picking up nothing. Rows of shelving, shadows between them, the pale wraparound of the stretch film on the pallets. Whoever was in there, They were positioned precisely far enough into the rows to remain invisible while being close enough to be heard clearly. That positioning was not accidental. I pulled the door shut. I walked back down the corridor at pace. Not running, because running felt like it might invite something, but moving with a purpose I hadn't had on the way in. At the entrance area, I picked up the radio and contacted dispatch, gave them the situation concisely. Unknown individual inside the main warehouse bay. Verbal contact made, identity unknown. Dispatch escalated it to the police immediately. I unlocked the front doors, stepped outside into the rain, and stood on the wet concrete apron while clear the entrance, watching the glass doors and listening to the rain and waiting. The first patrol car arrived in under 8 minutes. 2 officers went in through the front while a third waited outside. They were inside for perhaps 12 minutes. They came out alone. Have you ever experienced something you still can't explain? Share your story below. The footage, when dispatch and the police reviewed it the following morning, showed a man in his early to mid-50s entering the facility through a gap in one of the rear garage panels. A section of the corrugated sheeting that had partially detached from its fixing bolts along the bottom edge, creating a gap wide enough to squeeze through a floor level. The timestamp put his entry at just after 11, roughly 45 minutes before I'd heard the sound from the corridor. He had spent that time making his way through the rear sections of the building and into the bay where I found the door open. He was carrying something in his right hand throughout the footage. The image quality from the internal cameras was not high, and the analysts were careful about stating it definitively. But the consensus was that it was a blade of some kind, a fixed blade tool or knife held loosely at his side. He exited through the same rear panel gap approximately 4 minutes after I closed the warehouse door and left through the front entrance. The footage showed him pausing briefly at the gap before squeezing back through, turning once to look back into the building, and then disappearing into the rain outside, where the external cameras lost him in the darkness beyond the floodlight range. What he had come for, nobody established with any certainty. Nothing in the bay appeared to have been disturbed or taken. What he had intended by calling me into the darkness among those shelving rows, nobody said aloud, though the officers exchanged a look when the section of footage showing the knife was reviewed that told me everything I needed to understand about the range of possibilities. I completed that shift and the one after it because I didn't know what else to do. On the third day, I rang the security company, explained that I was resigning my position, and asked whether my final pay could be processed by bank transfer so I wouldn't need to return to collect anything in person. They were understanding about it. Most people in the industry, I think, have their version of a night they don't go back from. That was mine. Don't forget to like the video and support us by subscribing to the channel. This happened 4 years ago, on the night of the 5th of November, Guy Fawkes Night, as it's known across Britain. I'd recently started working at a petrol station forecourt on the outskirts of Bristol, a position I'd taken up barely 3 weeks earlier after finishing a short-term contract elsewhere. My friends had organized a large bonfire party out in the countryside that evening, the kind of event that gets planned for weeks with fireworks and food and the particular looseness that comes from people gathered around an open fire in the dark. I had to miss it entirely. Being so new to the job, I hadn't accumulated enough leave to book the night off, and my manager Gerald Holt had already filled the rota before I'd thought to ask. So I watched the bonfire photos accumulate on my phone throughout the evening from behind a glass counter, which is its own particular brand of misery. I came on at 8. The streets around the forecourt had that specific quality they get on nights like that. Reduced car traffic replaced by clusters of people on foot making their way between gardens and pub car parks where bonfires had been lit. Every few minutes, a distant firework would crack open somewhere beyond the rooftops and spray light across the low cloud cover. From behind the forecourt windows, it looked almost beautiful. Almost. The station was quiet, which I'd hoped for. A steady trickle of cars came through the first hour, people filling up on the way to parties, families buying last-minute snacks. but by 9:30, even that had thinned considerably. I remember standing at the window at one point and counting the seconds between passing cars and reaching nearly 3 minutes. The roads were empty enough that I kept noticing the same police patrol car making circuits of the area, a white and yellow BMW that I saw past the forecourt entrance at what felt like regular 15-minute intervals. I remember thinking idly that there must be something going on somewhere nearby to warrant that level of patrol presence, then deciding it was probably just routine crowd management for the evening. I was in the middle aisle of the shop, restocking the confectionery shelves, turning the facing forward on the chocolate bars, straightening the bags of sweets, when the entry sensor above the door gave its small, flat chime. I turned around. 3 men had walked in from the forecourt. The first thing that registered was that they were in costume. Full costumes, not the half-hearted kind that consists of a novelty hat and some face paint, but complete, deliberate outfits with full-face masks. Guy Fawkes Night isn't traditionally a costumed occasion the way Halloween is in America, but the two events had blurred together culturally enough over the years that it wasn't entirely out of place to see fancy dress on the 5th of November. Even so, something tightened in my chest the moment I saw them. The one in front was dressed as the plague doctor, the long black coat, the wide-brimmed hat, the beaked white mask that covers the entire face and gives the wearer the silhouette of something not quite human. The second was in a skull-face gimp mask paired with a military surplus jacket and heavy boots. Nothing specific enough to name as a character. The third, the one who came in last and moved immediately to the far end of the aisle without looking at me, was wearing a distressed clown costume, the kind with the oversized collar and the grease paint detailing built into the mask itself. None of them were young. I could see that within seconds. The plague doctor had thick forearms visible below his coat sleeves, the skin weathered and marked with old ink, a faded anchor on the left wrist, lettering along the back of the right hand that I couldn't read from a distance. The clown at the far end of the aisle had the build and gait of a man in his 40s, broad through the shoulders, moving with the settled heaviness of someone long past worrying about how they looked. The skull-masked one was somewhere in between, medium height, compact, saying nothing. I greeted them from the aisle. Something vague and automatic. Evening, all right? The kind of thing you say to anyone who walks in. The plague doctor glanced at me briefly. None of them responded. I told myself it meant nothing. People wear masks and stay in character. It was a festive night, and they'd presumably been drinking somewhere and were stopping in on the way to wherever they were going. I moved back around to the checkout counter and waited, watching them browse without appearing to watch them too intently. I noticed, after a moment, that there were no cars on the forecourt. I'd been occupied with the shelves when they came in and hadn't heard an engine. The forecourt outside was empty, the illuminated pump canopy casting its orange light over 4 vacant bays and nothing else. They had walked here, apparently, or come from somewhere immediately adjacent. The skull-masked one picked something up from the confectionery shelf, held it briefly, set it back down. The clown at the end of the aisle hadn't moved from his position since coming in. He was standing very still, facing the refrigerated drinks units, not looking at anything in particular. Then the plague doctor came to the counter and set down a large bag of wrapped boiled sweets, the individually wrapped kind, the sort you buy in bulk. I looked at the bag for a fraction of a second longer than I should have. A large bag of individually wrapped sweets, on a night when children were out in the streets. I pulled it toward me, found the barcode, and scanned it, named a price. The plague doctor reached into his coat and produced cash, counted it out in small denominations, laid it on the counter without a word. I opened the till drawer and began counting change. That was when I became aware that the clown had moved. He had come from the far end of the aisle and was now standing directly to my left on the customer side of the counter, close enough that I could hear his breathing through the mask. I hadn't heard him approach. He was simply suddenly there, and he was looking at me. I could see his eyes through the mask's narrow apertures, and they were fixed on me with an expression that had nothing idle about it. Not curiosity, not the unfocused gaze of someone waiting for a transaction to complete. Something focused and cold and assessing, like someone running calculations. I kept my hands moving, kept my face neutral, pushed the change across the counter. "Have a good one," I said. Nobody moved. Then the skull-masked figure, who had drifted without my noticing to the position near the front door, reached up and slid the security bolt across. The sound of it was small, barely a click, but it landed in the silence of that empty shop like something dropped from a great height. I had time to understand what was happening, and then the clown came around the end of the counter. He moved fast and with complete certainty, the way people move when they've rehearsed something. I had just enough time to take a single step backward before he hit me in the chest with both hands, and I went down hard onto the floor behind the counter, catching my elbow on the edge of the shelf unit on the way down. The impact knocked the air out of me. I lay there for a second staring up at the strip lighting. I told them, calmly, or as close to calmly as I could manage while winded and on the floor, that the till was right there, that I wouldn't do anything to stop them, that they could take whatever they wanted from the register. I kept my voice level. I've been told in a workplace safety course once that compliance reduces escalation. I was trying very hard to believe that. The plague doctor stepped past the register without looking at it. They weren't interested in the register. The skull-masked one produced a set of cable ties from his jacket pocket, the heavy-duty kind, the black ones, and crouched down beside me. I don't think I fully processed what was happening until I felt the plastic tighten around my wrists. Then I understood with total clarity that this was not a robbery. They hauled me upright. I tried to think about what I knew. 3 of them, one way in and one way out, bolt on the door, no cars on the forecourt. I tried to think about the patrol car I'd seen circling every 15 minutes. I tried to calculate when it had last gone past and how long until it came back. The skull-masked one checked the forecourt through the door, then the 3 of them moved me out through the entrance in a cluster, positioning me between them, so that from a distance I would have been difficult to distinguish from the group. The night air hit me immediately. Fireworks somewhere to the south, a low bloom of red and gold against the clouds. At the far edge of the parking lot, half on the verge and half on the grass, sat a large, dark-colored estate car with the engine off and no lights on. I hadn't seen it from inside because the angle of the forecourt canopy had blocked the sight line. They were moving me toward it. We were perhaps 8 meters from the edge of the tarmac when the light came. White and intensely bright, swinging across the forecourt from the road junction. A patrol car turning in with its full beams running, the light washing over all 4 of us simultaneously and throwing hard shadows toward the building. The 3 men stopped. There was a pause that lasted perhaps 1 second, in which I felt the grip on my arms slacken slightly, as though a decision was being made in real time. Then they dropped me, literally let go and stepped away, and I stumbled and went down onto one knee on the tarmac, and all 3 of them ran for the estate car. The patrol car was already accelerating toward them across the forecourt. The estate car's engine turned over twice without catching. I heard it from where I was kneeling on the ground, the starter motor grinding and failing, and I heard the officer on the radio calling for backup before he'd even fully stopped the car. The 3 men were still trying to get the engine started when the officer reached them. Backup arrived within 30 seconds, 2 cars coming in from different directions, and all 3 were out of the vehicle and on the ground before another minute had passed. The reason the patrol car had been running circuits of that area all evening, I learned afterward, was a report that had come in around 7 o'clock from a resident 2 streets away. A group of men in full Halloween-style costumes had been seen on the pavement near a primary school at the end of the road, approaching children who were out trick-or-treating with their families, offering sweets from a bag, attempting to steer children away from the group and further down the street. A parent had confronted them, and they'd moved on, but the report had been taken seriously enough to put a car on the area for the rest of the evening. The individually wrapped sweets from the counter of our shop, the children on the street. None of the 3 men said anything substantive during questioning, from what I was eventually told. No confession, No explanation, no stated motive. What they'd intended to do, with the children they'd tried to draw away, or with me, was never formally established. I've thought about it a great deal since then. About what would have happened if Gerald Holt had been working that shift instead of me. About what was in that estate car, and what I would have found when it stopped moving. About the timing, a patrol car on a 15-minute circuit, and the particular minute it chose to turn into that forecourt. I kept the job for another 2 months, then left for something with daylight hours. I don't regret that decision in the slightest, but I do think about the timing. I think about it more than I probably should.